Assalamu alaikum. Today's topic is Benazir Bhutto and her era from 1990 to 96. We are going to discuss about the successes and unsuccesses during her era for the lady. There are some steps taken by her which were useful for her rule, but there were some other steps which were not that useful and those caused failure. Let's see the syllabus outline on which we are mainly going to discuss about. She had from the very beginning Kashmir tension, which was coming from the previous governments, as public had intense demand to resolve this issue, and she had been signing agreements with India to resolve this issue, but nothing was done. Then there is opposition and demonstrations, processions by the opposition Pakistan Muslim League uh, N group, Nawaz Sharif's group was constantly having oppositions, demonstrations overall in the whole country, and there was the situation of unrest which was causing the failure of her government. Another issue which was coming from Ziaul Haq's time, that was terrorism and bombing constantly going on in different parts of the country, especially Balochistan and NWFP, and those people who had been involved in the war previously, Afghan-Russia war, now they were free and they adopted such activities which were related to terrorism and bombing, and they were using these terms and those ways to earn money for themselves. There were some banking scandals also. Banks provided loans to the politicians on very low interest rate, which were not returned to the banks, so that were causing the bankruptcy and then were causing failure of many banks in the country. It was also said that the husband of Benazir, Bhutto, was also taking many loans which he was not returning, so those were also causing the failure of the banks. Unemployment and inflation was also another issue. Public was having very high hopes then that there would be a democratic government, then they were going to have their better society, they were going to have employment, they were going to have more rights. But the thing was, things were not that smooth as those were expected, because there was mostly unemployment in the country, problem was not solved, increased population was there, while the chances of employment were very low. While along with that, inflation rate and increase in the rates of the food items and other commodities of life was also very high. So that was causing a problem. Pakistan's money was devaluing constantly in comparison to US dollar, and there were already a lot of international loans from IMF and World Bank. So as the money was devaluing, that means that the ratio of loan was constantly automatically increasing. So that was causing concern for the economists in the country, how Pakistan was going to pay back that loan. So when there was the problem of giving loans back, installments of interests back, there was very less chance left to develop new industries and develop new businesses and provide employment to the people. So in general, overall balance of payment problem were there. Mostly imports were of high value, exports were of low value, and that was causing negative balance of payment and problems for the country. Though she tried to decrease imports in the country, but still the problem remained the same. Then there was army unrest in the army, because during this era, Farooq Laghari was the president. He was interested to appoint some other army persons as generals, while Benazir wanted to take this charge in her own hands. So there was a rift in this kind of balance of power, and that was constantly causing an unrest in general. In the meanwhile, Punjab's chief minister was dismissed, and that Punjab being the most powerful province of the country, so there was an unrest in this part of the country, and overall there were processions seen. So finally, all these general issues in the country caused the president of Pakistan, Farooq Laghari, to decide about the dismissal of Benazir Bhutto. During this era, 1993 to 96, Benazir took up some steps also for the betterment of women in the society. Then she worked for the rural development of the society, rural part of the society. Then she introduced green tractor scheme also on very low interest rate, or in some areas without interest loans are provided to the farmers to buy tractors for the mechanization of agricultural system. Some efforts were done for population control, but those were not very successful, but those efforts were there. Medical facilities were tried to be provided to the rural women, and to some extent those were successful, but not to that large extent as those were expected. Uh, in the meanwhile, there were some cooperative arrangements with the United States at international level for peacekeeping purposes. United Nations wanted Pakistan to become independent and to come out of that war zone which was created in this part during Afghan-Russia war. And there were still many militants who were in moving in between Afghanistan and Pakistan. And United Nations wanted that along with the United States, this peacekeeping operation in this area could be settled in a better manner. United Nations provided chance to Pakistan government to send its 5,000 troops to Somalia, where some unrest was there, and these Pakistani soldiers worked for United Nations and paid well for that, and got international experience also, which was an addition to the Pakistan Army. Some reductions were there in Pakistan's trade deficit, and those were because imports were reduced to some extent, while exports were increased. So it could be seen it was, to some extent, it was better. And there was slight rise in the foreign exchange reserves also. It was also seen that US Hillary Clinton visited Pakistan, and it was also said that grants and loans were decided to be given to Pakistan for its privatization policy, which Benazir was going to introduce. She was also denationalizing many of those industries which were nationalized by Zulfikar Ali Bhutto, and she showed that she had a different plan of then nationalization, and she was thinking about privatization of many of the businesses in the country, and that basically caused the increase in the interest of World Bank and IMF in this country, that people are going to work for different businesses and they could earn for them. United States lifted some economic and military sanctions also, but along with this lifting of economic and military sanctions, the main purpose was that they wanted Pakistan to end its nuclear program. But Pakistan refused to do so. All these things were out of Benazir's hands. So in this manner, embargoes remained imposed, and whatever promises and of lifting all these military sanctions were there, those could not be fulfilled to a very successful manner. Some internal problems were there for Benazir Bhutto, along with those international issues also. That inside her Sindh province, where she was most popular, she was trying to and trying to satisfy with special rights for the Sindhi people. While MQM was, it had been supporting Benazir Bhutto to establish its government, but now well-educated Mahajirs wanted that more importance must be given to Mahajir Qawmi movement in Karachi, while less importance must be given to the rural areas. But Benazir's focus this time was that she must do something for those Sindhi people who were mostly giving her vote and who were the most support area for her. And she had not been fulfilling those promises previously to that extent. So that is why she decided to work for that. So it was causing a clash in her own province, most popular province, Sindh, where she was constantly having this tussle between MQM and Sindhis. Sindhi areas, this growing opposition for Pakistan People's Party was constantly a threat for her popularity, and her popularity going right and left constantly due to this kind of tussle over there. These collisions with the government were sometimes there, and sometimes these were constantly in threat. So it seemed that she was not that successful to continue with MQM in this manner. In the meanwhile, in Punjab, Nawaz Sharif joined with Islami Jamhuri Ittehad. He took support of ulamas, and ulamas started propagating that government of a woman was against Islam. So this thing basically was a great concern and problem for Benazir, because she was unable to handle this situation. She was a lady, and definitely she had to prove her potential, remaining in the same status. Keeping this thing in mind, many people started rethinking about Benazir Bhutto, even her own mother, Nusrat Bhutto. Nusrat Bhutto decided to mm, invite her brother, Mir Murtaza Bhutto, and Mir Murtaza Bhutto was basically given the responsibility to start Al Zulfikar and take up the system uh, to run PPP in a better manner. Nusrat Bhutto herself was turned against her own daughter, and she now wanted an independent Pakistan People's Party in the form of Al Murtaza and under Mir Murtaza Bhutto. Mir Murtaza Bhutto conducted some public meetings also, which were quite successful, and it was a cause of concern for her husband Asif Ali Zardari, who thought that if this popularity was going to be dragged towards Mir Murtaza Bhutto, Benazir was going to lose her popularity and seat, which he did not want. Because on the basis of her post, he was taking a lot of concessions, and he thought that those concessions were going out of his hands. Previously, also there were accusations that he was by her political opponents, that Asif Ali Zardari was having some corruption or some kickbacks from different institutions, though those were not proved. But this kind of allegations Nusrat Bhutto did not want to take for PPP due to Asif Ali Zardari, and she did not want to put it as a stigma. That is why she turned towards her own son, Mir Murtaza Bhutto. But a very sad incident occurred, that in the meanwhile, in a police ambush, Mir Murtaza Bhutto was suddenly murdered, and Benazir did not allow for any kind of investigations of this case, which placed a clear blame on Benazir Bhutto, that she was behind this, or her husband was behind this murder. So this caused a reduction in the popularity of Benazir Bhutto in Pakistan People's Party, and keeping all processions in all parts of the country, declining economy, and rifts between president and prime minister. Prime Minister thought that this was the time, if she wanted to secure her position, she must end the Eighth Amendment and take up the charge. And Farooq Laghari, who was the president, who promised in the beginning that he was going to end Eighth Amendment and giving most of the power to Prime Minister, she asked him to finish and Eighth Amendment. But President Farooq Laghari refused for that, and even in the assembly, she had not enough number to end this Eighth Amendment. So this clear contrast of opinions between Benazir Bhutto and Farooq Laghari was very obvious, and finally Farooq Laghari, blaming everything on Benazir Bhutto and Asif Ali Zardari, he dismissed her, and in place of her, Malik Miraj Khalid was appointed as caretaker prime minister. If we assess overall the era of Benazir Bhutto, evaluate her, so we can come to know that Benazir Bhutto remained surrounded with multiple issues, and that is why, though he had a lot of potential, though there were a lot of expectations of better potential from her, and she also was very much eager to do her better, to work for the betterment of the society, but she could not handle all these matters, and finally her government was collapsed. So in this manner, overall, it was surrounded with problems, and she tried her best, but the thing was that Pakistan got rid of the dictatorship of Ziaul Haq, and Pakistan was now entering in a situation where democracy was the main system of government. Thank you. Allah Hafiz. Assalamu alaikum.